As a matter of fact, the governor's top economic advisor, his A&F secretary, said in January of this year, long before this mess on Wall Street, if the legislature doesn't address its spending, we're going to be looking at somewhere north of $1 billion deficit this year. Now, we're looking at somewhere north of $1 billion deficit this year, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, but these are exactly the issues I've been talking about all along.
And frankly, I think what we need to move away from in state government is a discussion of where blame lies.
The fact that this year, going into the budget process, they knew they were $1 billion in deficit, and they went in the House literally behind closed doors, and they're added $220 million in additional earmarked spending. Now, whether each of those individual projects is quote-unquote wasteful or not, I don't know. I do know we didn't have the dollars for them when they were earmarked. We don't have the dollars for them today, and they're going to end up being cut, and that hurts cities and towns. To do what the governor did today and go in after a couple weeks talking about making very difficult decisions and go in and say he's taken a scalpel to state government to deal with a $1.4 billion deficit, you know, I'm skeptical about whether he's going to have to be back up on that podium in a few months, taking more of a meat cleaver. No, he said today he's going to make cuts that result in the cutting of 1,000 state jobs. Well, since he came into office, he's added 2,000 workers to the state workforce. So he's cut 50% back on what he added. He's cut his office budget by 10%. Well, since he came into office, he's increased his office's budget by 24%. So he's not even near back to where he started. I am absolutely categorically opposed to a hike in the state's gas tax. Frankly, even the governor has said a gas tax hike is, for now, off the table. He recognizes, I assume, that during the current economic climate, the last thing we ought to be doing is piling more taxes and expenses on our citizens. So I absolutely categorically oppose an increase in the gas tax. It doesn't matter if it's the only tax in the state that hasn't gone up since 1991. Great, fantastic. The rest have gone up quite considerably since that time.
So what I have said, the Transportation Finance Commission report suggested an increase in the gas tax as a possible solution along with a number of other recommendations. I will not at this point write any recommendations off the table, especially when it comes to an issue of public safety. You know, every time the state looks at a problem, it then immediately pivots and looks to the taxpayers' pockets. You know, every time we talk about this issue, my opponent brings up the Transportation Finance Commission report, and she always says it's one of the best instances of government that she's seen. I was in the governor's office when that commission was created. It was created 4 years before they issued their report, so it took 4 years to put together that report. I'm close friends with the chair of the Transportation Finance Commission. We've talked about these issues at length, and it is true that they recommend an increase in the gas tax. It is also true that they they advocate for increased tolls on the Massachusetts Turnpike, pretty much in perpetuity. To my mind, there's 17, I believe, recommendations in that document. We ought to go through the other 15 before we turn again to the taxpayer and say we want more of your dollars out of your wallet when you're at the pump, and we want more at the tolls. We ought to take down the tolls because it was wrong to burden our commuters with the cost of the big dig when they did it in 1997, and it's wrong today. This points up a fundamental philosophical difference, and as I've said all along in this race, there are hundreds of legislators in the State House right now who share my opponent's general philosophy on government. There are very few who share mine. And so with nothing against my opponent, who I know is well-meaning and a good public servant and wants to do this job for all the right reasons, her point of view on this kind of thing is overrepresented already. My point of view is vastly underrepresented, and I think people need more people going to say, no more coming to our wallets, categorically, not we'll discuss it, not we'll do another study. There are huge dollars to be found in reform of some fundamental ways that we do business in government, starting with our public pension system. You know, people who haven't worked in state government and haven't seen the way that system is gamed, with you know, legislators running for re-election and then serving 1 day before retiring because they get credit by serving 1 day for the whole year for their pension, or people who get a promotion for 1 day at the end of their tenure in state government because they're going to get 85% of their salary at the highest level for the rest of their career. What is your position on the MCAS exam and on the notion that teachers ought to have, so there ought to be some measure of performance of teachers and either salary incentives for higher performance or
adverse reactions to lower performance.
I have concerns about the way the current MCAS system is implemented. What I see, and I've got children in the public schools right now, I see the current situation focusing teachers on a single set of exams and spending a tremendous amount of time doing that, instead of looking at the long-term need for education, which is critical thinking, which is sort of an expanded creative curriculum that will allow our students of the future to have, fill the creative jobs that are going to drive our economy forward. So I do think we need to rethink MCAS, rethink education continually to improve it and adapt to what we need for the future.
My question actually stemmed from the fact that I'm aware that last week the Massachusetts Teachers Association paid for a mailing for you, and that's several $1,000s to do that. And I know from dealing with the Massachusetts Teachers Association that they are very strict about their criteria for endorsement. They are strongly against MCAS. They have put up roadblocks to teacher accountability. And so I would ask, in light of the positions you just stated, if you would be willing to share the questionnaire that you filled out for them to get their endorsement.
Well, I do have a questionnaire, and I certainly am willing to make that available. As a matter of fact, I think transparency in government is absolutely something that we need to do. And I would actually also ask you to identify those individuals on your campaign finance report who are registered lobbyists. Because I think you've made a comment about being an independent voice for this district, and I think that the voters need to understand how independent you'll be and whether where you're getting your financing, because you've raised a tremendous amount of money. And I think, again, to your point about transparency, let's open it up and be very clear about where our interests lie.
Absolutely. Actually, the Secretary of State website will tell you everyone on my list who's a lobbyist. There's not too many of them, but the point I would make is that any individual contribution in my fundraising report represents less than 1% of the total money I've raised. Those mailers that the Mass League of Environmental Voters have done for you, that the MTA have done for you, those are thousands of dollars, and I suspect that those represent a much larger percentage of the money that you've raised. And so if you're talking about, and these are groups that have very serious agendas and very strict criteria as to who they'll support and what they ask of who they support. And I've been there. They're very aggressive in enforcing that. And so, if you think a $200 contribution representing less than 1% of all my contributions is going to win someone some sway over my thinking, I don't see the logic in that, and that's certainly not the case. Our government took in $1 billion more than they budgeted for last year, spent that $1 billion, spent another $1 billion, leading directly to the mess we're in right now. And so the voters are speaking in the only way that they can in this system where the legislature does not respond to them. They're sticking it in their face. And in recent history, when the voters have done that, the legislature has smushed it right back. And as Joan Vanaki said in the Boston Globe last week, no conservative columnist, if we want to change government on Beacon Hill, we have to elect more Republicans, members of the minority party who have a different point of view than the people up there who treat us like an ATM.
I'm going to cut it right here.
I want a piece of this.
Public education ought to be a priority of state government, and it ought to be funded adequately before we run off to the caucus chamber and add $220 million of earmarks for little pet projects. I've been in the State House, and Carolyn talks a lot about her local experience, and that's very valuable. We're not running for selectmen. I was the governor's deputy legal counsel. My job was to review every piece of legislation passed by the legislature. I know how our legislature works, how it doesn't work, how it interacts with cities and towns, and how it should be fixed.
Okay.
When you say time after time, fiscal impact statement, I'm going to go work with people, you're talking about an understanding of state government that doesn't exist right now. And it doesn't exist specifically because there are 141 members in the House who are a member of the same party. And the supermajority doesn't follow its own rules. It does everything behind closed doors. The only way to fix that is to get some balance in government. I represent that, and my opponent does not.